Discriminate against my coworkers and make my life a living hell? I'll destroy your entire business. Many years ago, I worked at an automotive repair shop that was owned by a very nasty person. This person actually had 2 shops that he ran, and the best way I can describe him was as a tyrant. Both shops had cameras, and he would watch us work from the comfort of his home. If he saw something he didn't like, such as taking a 5-minute smoke break, or not sweeping for half a minute during downtime, or if he just wanted to bust balls, he would call the shop and harass us. Or better yet, at times, show up and harass us in person. In addition, he would regularly berate us for no reason, threaten to not pay us because the shops weren't busy, and would have an absolute meltdown if you dared question his authority. It was spectacular, in the worst of ways. After working for him for a few months, and dealing with his shenanigans, and getting sick of pointless arguments with him, I started reconsidering my employment there. Around the same time, the owner decided to move me from one shop to the other, really for no reason other than likely to try push me out, as that was what he did with the few people that I had already worked with. Odd coincidence being that I had not discussed my thoughts of leaving with anyone, but I digress. I genuinely disliked the idea of working at this other shop. It was older and a bit run down, plus it was in a pretty terrible area with high crime. But I wanted to line something up elsewhere before I jumped ship. So I made the move. This is where the beginning of the end started for old Mr. Owner. Once I got settled into the new shop, I got to talking with my fellow technicians. As it turns out, the owner was unsurprisingly a racist scumbag, and every single one of the employees at this location, aside from me, was African American. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it's a miracle that the owner came into the shop, said what he said, and walked out breathing. In addition, he would regularly send people home with no pay for the day just to be a jerk. This went on for a few weeks, him coming by and being nasty to all of us. I was over it. I was just about to leave as I had lined up other employment. The other techs were also over it. I went to give the owner my 2-week notice via phone, discreetly, which I should have known wasn't a great idea, and instead of discussing it like a human, he decided to come down and talk face to face. Well, our friend was so incensed that I put my notice in that he forced me to clock out and go home, and also forced 2 other techs who decided to stand up for me to do the same. I decided that I had had enough of this guy's abuse. Not only did he deserve to have some kind of consequence against him, but the other techs deserved better than continually being harassed by their boss. So I filed a complaint with the Department of Labor and outlined everything. Within a few days, they had launched an investigation, and of course, the owner found out who filed the complaint and called the shop, and gave me hell about it. This was stupid on his part because the phones he had were on recorded lines. Guess who I had requested to listen to that conversation? In the end, I was terminated by him prior to my 2 weeks being up, as were the 2 techs who stood behind me. I filed for unemployment, which he fought me on by filing appeals with a judge, then not showing up 3 times in a row. This prompted the judge to bar him from requesting appeals against me and granting me full unemployment pay. Months later I got a written letter from him extending an apology and offer to work for him again. 2 months later, I got a letter from the Dole saying that the investigation was closed and that he had been found guilty of multiple charges. As a result, he was barred from operating a shop or any other business in the state for several years. What is the creepiest, most bone-chilling thing that has ever happened to you at night? How did he get in? I was about 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I liked sleeping in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the 1st floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer and my mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remembered sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the doorframe of my mom's room. It was strange because our cat was a huge snuggler and was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and woke her up. In the 3-4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the doorframe and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, But my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Since we were on the first floor, it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. But the strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night, with a deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. She ended the life of his dogs. In response, he burned it all down. My crazy, antisocial, elderly aunt lives in the mountains of West Virginia. My aunt is a mean, bitter old woman, who was suspected of shooting and ending the life of her ex-husband, but the cops could never pin it on her. Years ago, she bought a small home on some land that borders the land of another family in a small, narrow, isolated, forested mountain valley. The other family had been living there for a long time, and they just wanted to be left alone, like most people who choose to live in a remote mountain location in West Virginia. My aunt bought chickens and started to let them run around, unfenced on her property, and the neighbors' dogs were very interested in those chickens. The chickens would roam around, and go over onto the neighbor's property. One day, without warning, she ended the life of her neighbor's dogs for eating one of her chickens, and only one of the dogs was ended on her property. The other one was ended in the neighbor's front yard. The neighbors had small kids and they loved those dogs. My aunt walked over with a 12 gauge and told the neighbors that they had better never get another chicken-eating dog again, or else she would end them too. The neighbors didn't take too kindly to her ending their dogs, and her actions with the 12 gauge, waving it around and threatening them. It was over the top. But they didn't call the cops, knowing that my crazy aunt, who had a reputation for being violent, was unlikely to be arrested, and if she was arrested, she would just quickly be released from jail and be back. So a couple of weeks later, when my aunt went into town, her home's back window was broken, and a bottle of burning oil and gas was thrown into her home. By the time the fire department finally arrived, the home was a complete loss. Every firearm my aunt owned, along with all her other worldly possessions, was incinerated. Even the chicken coop burned down. The neighbors didn't see nothing and the sheriff's department couldn't prove anything. My aunt had a long list of enemies. She didn't work and was too poor and lazy to have homeowner insurance. So she had to move, and her son eventually bought her a cheap, run-down trailer in town. Those of us who knew my aunt figured she got what she deserved. Moral of the story: don't screw with a mountain man's dog. What's the most tragic thing you've ever seen? 2 police officers in uniform walked into the store just as we were getting ready to close for the night. One of the men walked up and set a plastic bag and a roll of film on the counter in front of me. Inside the plastic bag was a small black camera. The camera was smashed up pretty bad. There is a roll of film in this camera that we need to get out and develop if possible. Is this something you can help with? I was about 19 years old at the time, working in a photography store at a mall in rural Southwest Virginia, right on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. We have a film lab at the police station, but our equipment is broken at the moment. We need to get this film developed as soon as possible. And we don't know how to get this out of the camera without ruining the film. Since the camera was broken, the film was stuck in the camera in the middle of the roll. If the camera was working, the film could be wound back into the roll and protected from the light when the back cover of the camera was opened. If they opened the camera to take out the film as it was, any pictures that were taken would immediately be ruined once the undeveloped film was exposed to the light. We did have a small black box to use for this exact type of situation. The box was sealed so no light would get inside. I could put the broken camera inside the sealed box, reach my hands through an opening on each side of the box, slip my hands into black gloves that were attached inside, and open the camera to remove the film without any light damaging it before it was developed. I told him I could help. No problem at all. Did you hear about the plane crash this afternoon? We recovered the camera from the crash site. We don't know what is on the roll of film, but it might help us find out what went wrong. Are you okay with developing those pictures for us? I am sure there are people who would say no to that question. I was not one of those people. Of course I would help. And I was curious to see what was on the roll of film. Can you develop this other roll of film as well? These are the pictures we took at the crash site. They are quite gruesome though. The pictures of the crash, before the bodies were taken to the morgue. And there are a few pictures from the morgue as well. It really is okay if you would prefer not to develop these, but we figure it doesn't hurt to ask. I had been working all day, so I hadn't seen the news. A small private plane crashed just a few miles from the store where I was working. It wasn't that uncommon for plane crashes like this to happen. The Appalachian Mountains were not easy for small planes to fly in and out of. Since the photo equipment at the police station wasn't working, if we were not able to help them, they would have to drive over an hour away to the next closest photography store. Or wait however many weeks it would take for them to get their equipment fixed. I told him I would help. No problem at all. My coworker offered to help as well. She took the camera out of the plastic bag to start working on removing the roll of film while I grabbed the second roll to start developing the photos from the crash site. The pictures came through one at a time, each one more horrific than the last. The plane crashed in the middle of the woods, barreling through layers of trees before it hit the ground. Plane parts were everywhere. There was hardly anything left of the plane itself. There were pictures of each of the bodies of the 4 men who were on the plane. Their bodies were large, covered in blood. I could see their limbs disconnected and lying on the ground, far from where the bodies were. The men's bodies were torn to pieces, just like the plane was. It was surreal. I packaged up the stack of pictures in an envelope with a huge lump in my throat. All of a sudden I wanted to unsee everything I just saw. But it was too late. As I handed the envelope to the police officer, my coworker handed me the second roll that she was able to remove from the broken camera. As I developed the film from the camera, I saw there were only 4 pictures taken on that roll of film. The first 2 were pictures of the 4 men standing next to their plane. Fishing gear in hand, huge joyful smiles on their faces, arms wrapped around each other for a group photo before taking off for a weekend fishing trip. All 4 of them looked like they were in their mid to late 50s. The third was a photo taken on the plane by one of the men sitting in the front seat of the 2 men who were sitting in the back seat. The last photo was of the plane's control panel. When the plane started to go down, before it crashed, one of the men took a picture of the control panel. He must have taken the photo knowing there may be a chance that the camera would survive the crash, and there would be a small glimpse of what went wrong. A small piece of evidence to help explain to their loved ones what happened, and to hopefully prevent this from happening again. In their last moments they were courageous. I thought about those men for months. I wondered how long they knew each other. How many fishing trips had they been on together? What did they say to each other when they knew the plane was going down? Were they at peace with their lives before everything ended so abruptly? This was over 15 years ago and I still see each of those pictures so vividly in my mind as I type this.